Hello everyone and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. The footage in the background for today still comes in from Guild Wars Insider. This should be, I'm hoping to get another episode out of the Ascalon Catacombs. It might be that the starting footage from this episode is kind of similar to the ending footage of last video, but if I do that then that means we'll get the dungeon footage for like 4 days instead of 3. But hey, it's from them. Thank you very much guys for that. And yeah, today we're going to be talking about lore. Before we jump in though, I've kind of got like a pre-question of sorts. Somebody asked, will people that have never played the original Guild Wars or just forget go back into the lore? Is there an in-detail intro? Or is it more you play and learn the lore as you go along? That was asked by Krillsmore. And I didn't really want to dedicate full time to this as a question, but I should point out that with Guild Wars 2, a lot of this Guild Wars 1 lore stuff that's here really, I'm hoping to show people on YouTube that it's a very in-depth universe and there's a lot of really awesome stuff going on in the universe. But the truth is for Guild Wars 2, where it's 250 years forward in the future, you won't need to watch an in-detail intro to understand everything that's going on in Guild Wars 2, just because it's so far forward in the future and it's going to be dealing with a lot more new content. You know, there are 4 playable races now. A lot, you will have noticed that I'm talking about in these lore episodes, is very much to do with the humans, and that's because a lot of the lore hasn't been really shown to us yet for the other races, and just by the nature of that, that means that you won't need to have a massive in-detailed knowledge of Guild Wars 1. Also, as well, to make you feel a little bit better if you don't know that much about the lore, Guild Wars 1 players and the game itself, most people never cared for the story. Honestly, most people played through it. I'm one of them. First time I played through the game, I did not focus on the story at all. I didn't really care about it. However, thousands and thousands of hours later down the line, I started to look into it a little bit more. I realised how much there was there, and that was kind of when I really started doing this whole thing on this channel on YouTube. So you'll find also that you're not caught behind a lot of other Guild Wars 1 players, because even though there was a lot going on, Guild Wars 1, although better than most MMOs, still wasn't amazing at producing its story to its players. So even though it had these cutscenes and a very linear, cool storyline, and it definitely was leaps and bounds ahead of other MMOs at the time in the sense of delivering the story and making the story important in comparison to other MMOs, even with that included, a lot of people never really cared for the story with Guild Wars 1 players. I would say honestly that if you've watched enough of my videos, you probably know more about the lore than a lot of players that have even spent a good 1,000 hours in Guild Wars 1, just because it's not something you care about so much when you're in game, even though there is all this good stuff. So I get that question kind of a lot, and I wanted to point that out to everyone, that there's this big universe here, but I will not butter it up and pretend to you guys that you need to know all this stuff. It should just be, if you're interested in what I'm talking about, then hey, you'll probably get a lot more out of the game when you're actually in there, because you'll be able to appreciate all these little bits of the story that other people might actually end up missing. Also, there was another question on our last lore video. There were a lot of good lore questions, so this is good. I can't wait to do like the next few days of lore questions. One of them, though, had a lot of thumbs up, and it was about the Norn hero Asgeir and how he broke a tooth off of one of the Elder Dragon's Jormag, and it's now there in Holbrack, and you can walk up to it, and it's this huge tooth. And basically, the guy asking the question summed up nearly all of the story for me, and it had a lot of thumbs up, so I felt like I should probably mention it. There isn't any more story on it. Sorry guys, it's just that this guy somehow, this Norn, managed to break one of the tooths of Jormag. We've heard that you pretty much in Edge of Destiny need a magical weapon of some form to be able to do damage to an Elder Dragon. In fact, there's this amazing scene in Edge of Destiny where Ritlock is there with his magical sword, Sahothin, and he's kind of considering breaking it, if I remember rightly, but he doesn't in the end. And then later on in the story, you find that really you need these magical weapons, and it kind of raises the question, what would have happened if Ritlock tried to break the tooth? As many Norn try to do, that's like a custom of theirs, trying to break the tooth. Somebody replied to that comment, actually, and mentioned the Spirits of the Wild, and how they may have helped him out. That very much comes into it as well. The Spirits of the Wild helped the Norn escape the north. It's pretty much saved the Norn from themselves, because the Norn love challenges so much. When Jormag, or Dragon as they call him, started threatening their land, the Norn were just like, yeah, we can take him on, we can do it, fine, let's fight him. And they were pretty much going to fight themselves to the brink of extinction, but the Spirits of the Wild actually told the Norn pretty much, no, stop it, you need to go south or you're all going to die. Which is interesting to think that the Spirits of the Wild watch over them in that way, but that is certainly what happened there, and a part of the story with the tooth does have something to do with the Spirits of the Wild as well. But yeah, the first real question was asked by Newhouse, who said, in Guild Wars Nightfall, Cormyr became a human god, but she was human herself. Were the other gods also originally humans? Because Melandri would then be kind of like an early Sylvari. Well, it's a bit of a leap to say the Melandrus are Sylvari. I can see that theory, though, especially if you are a believer in the cycles of the Sylvari, then yeah, that could happen. But gods definitely do seem that they can be non-human. The early lore we know of the gods, this one of the reasons should probably make it clear that the gods are so interesting in Guild Wars universe, is because we know so little about them, go figure. But one of the earliest really things we can trace back to them that we know about was obviously before they brought the humans to Tyria. So we know that they brought humans to Tyria, which means that presumably they interacted with humans elsewhere. So does this mean that, say, Dwayna, one of the older gods, we don't know about a predecessor for Dwayna, and we know she was there right at the start of time for Tyria, or at least with the Mavelian calendar as the humans count time. We know she was there, so we know she's an old god, and we know that she was probably responsible for bringing the humans to Tyria herself, along with Lissa, Melandru, and Balthazar. So we know that these guys were not like the really old gods. Does this mean that they were humans, they were mortals on the planet they originally were on, and then different gods made them gods? Because it's established in the Guild Wars universe, to become a god, you need to take the power of another god. That's not new for fantasy worlds, definitely not. It's a very repeated storyline, but it works, I like it, and that's kind of how it works in Guild Wars. So, we heard about a predecessor to Grenth, the god of death, called Doom, and he had been defeated by Grenth, so Grenth became the new god of death. And he changed things up a little bit. He decided that people could be resurrected, and he allowed things like summoning minions and so forth. And the big, obviously, plot that we came into direct contact with in the Guild Wars 1 story was in Nightfall, when a fallen god, Abaddon, the other gods couldn't defeat this god. He was doing terrible things for the world. He was pretty much creating chaos, giving everyone magic for bad reasons, and the other gods wanted him out of the picture. He started creating an army, trying to fight against the other gods, so they smited him down. All 5 of them it took to bring him down, this 6th god, Abaddon. But they could never truly defeat him, because you need a mortal to take the power of that god. So instead they imprisoned him in an alternate reality or realm or dimension. It's not 100% clear what it is, but it's called the Realm of Torment, and Abaddon just kind of stayed there for a long time. Eventually Abaddon began to learn how to manipulate that realm, made it all incredibly messed up, and also learned how he could bring about his resurface to the mortal world, which is what the event Nightfall was known as. That was Abaddon trying to come back. But this fallen god couldn't be defeated until eventually Cormyr, a human, came and absorbed his power right at the end of Nightfall, and she became the new god herself, and that ended Abaddon, essentially. The funny thing is, though, that in Grenth's case, he became the new god of death and ice, but his predecessor, Doom, does still exist in some form. Like, a big plot of some of the endgame in Guild Wars 1, in the Underworld, is all about how this old god, that presumably had all of his powers taken away from him when Grenth usurped him, is still kicking about. So that could mean Abaddon's still kicking about, and a lot of people always try and bring that up. Oh, is Abaddon coming back? Oh, maybe Abaddon was just corrupted by Zhaitan when the gods lived at Ur, because Zhaitan was asleep under Ur, and maybe he'll be a good guy. People just go on about it endlessly, but ArenaNet have pretty clearly said that Abaddon isn't coming back for Guild Wars 2, so even while there's scope for it in lore, they're not going to go with that story. Hey, maybe in like 10 years we'll see them go with it. But yeah, it does raise the question of the other gods, the other human gods. Are they human or not? I don't think that they are humans, personally, because although it seems that Cormyr changed in bodily form when she became a god, when she became the goddess of truth, she did change quite a lot in her appearance, but she was still very distinctly human. She didn't grow any new appendages or anything. But on the other hand, you can actually see, particularly Dwayna and Melandru, look like humans, quite like humans, but they've got these big wings. And there's all this interesting stuff in the Guild Wars universe about how Harpies, which were a race that were introduced in Nightfall, just seemingly a mindless race of mobs that would fight you. But there's a lot of lore about how the Harpies are fallen race, and they used to be a lot more grand and possibly live on other worlds, and that they were these beautiful mythical creatures, these Harpies, and now they've fallen. And you can look at that and wonder whether maybe Dwayna and Melandru were these original Harpies before they became gods. On top of that, there's more evidence for it as well, because when you get into the really amazing areas of the mist, like the Hall of Heroes, you can see a lot of architecture that seems to have been created by godly beings themselves, and in these areas you can find lots of statues of big winged women that look very similar to the kind of design that Dwayna and Melandru have got. So they certainly seem like they could have been a different race. Grenth has got a ram skull for his head, but is otherwise entirely human, so that begs the question whether is that just a part of his race when he was alive, or was that a part of his transformation when he became a god? The other question with Grenth is, when did he become the god that he is? When did he usurp Doom, the previous god? Because if it was somewhat recent, then that could mean that it was Doom that lived in Ara, in Or, and it wasn't Grenth, which could very well mean that there's a lot of story there about how this human Grenth lived on Tyria and somehow grew up. In fact, I believe someone in the community was writing a fan fiction about that, and it was actually really, really good. So, yeah, it's an interesting topic. It definitely is. There's a lot you can go into with it. I'm sure I've been way too vague for you guys that aren't too into the lore, but hopefully I've kind of brushed across it well enough for those of you who could follow what I was saying. The second question was asked by Lionheart. Oh, I'm not going to have time to do 3 questions again, am I? Well, I've kind of done 3 because I opened up with a question. Alright, so the last question, sorry guys, was asked by Lionheart LP, who said, are the gods like Menzies considered canon? I mean, I know that he was a central part of the Fissure of Woe, whilst Doom was a central part of the Underworld, but were they put in as an antagonist, or do they have any relationship with the gods? Well, yeah, they do have a relationship. They're not just cop-out enemies that have been thrown in there. Doom and Menzies have been in Guild Wars lore since the initial launch of the game. They are some of the older lore that's been established for Guild Wars, so they are most certainly canon. These days, we know a lot more about Doom because the Underworld, one of the endgame areas, has had a lot of updates over the years, and these updates have included adding him as a fully fledged boss in the Underworld and adding a lot of storyline about him during Halloween quests. He's essentially the main antagonist when you go to the Underworld. There were 2 endgame areas when Prophecies first came out. There was the Underworld, but there was also the Fissure of Woe. And at the initial launch, both of these places had kind of an antagonist that was referred to but never seen. Now in the Underworld, we have seen Doom, but there was one for the Fissure of Woe as well, and this was this guy called Menzies. The Fissure of Woe is Balthazar's realm. I've mentioned before that all the gods kind of have their own little realms, the Underworld being Grenth's realm. Well, Balthazar's realm is the Fissure of Woe, and the antagonist god in the Fissure of Woe is Balthazar's very own half-brother. I picked this question for the next one because it kind of ties into what we were talking about just now, in that they've established here that the gods can be related to one another, which could say something about what they were when they were mortals. Obviously, a lot of races, I don't think many fantasy games introduce races that have no relatives whatsoever. That's quite an interesting thought. But it certainly does seem like when all these things were mortal, these gods, they did have these connections. And the question is, why are 2 people from the same family? Let's just assume that Balthazar was a human. In that situation, why is it that he became a god and also his half-brother became a god? In this situation, it certainly seems like that wasn't very plausible. It seems like there are actual families of gods. So, for example, if, I'm going to regret pointing out this example, but say Cormyr and Balthazar got together for whatever reason and had a child, it seems to suggest that that child would also be a god. So not only are new gods born by usurping the power of previous gods, but does this also mean that they can reproduce? And in that case, why aren't there more gods than we're aware of at the moment? And that's another question. Why haven't we heard about more gods? We haven't heard that there couldn't be more. Maybe it's just that the 6 human gods we're aware of care more for Tyria, and there are other worlds out there with different gods of their own. Then you also break it down into individual beliefs within Tyria, because the Scale, for example, a mindless race of trash mobs that haven't got much lore written about them at all, also have appointed a god for themselves, which is this really, really big scale called Moavu Karl that they worship. And do we recognise that as a legitimate god? It's the same as when the White Mantle had their Masat gods. Do we recognise those guys as legitimate gods? It changes very much, and it gets even more interesting than that when you find out that the Luxons, a faction of humans in Cantha, these are real humans, worship 3 extra gods to the rest of the gods that we're aware of. So there's the main 6 for them, but then they also believe in 3 gods called the 3 Sisters, and they've got their names. One of them's called Amora, one of them's called Elora, I think. They've all got, I think, quite Greek names because the Luxons are based off of the Greeks quite heavily, but they've got 3 extra gods in their pantheon. Well, where do those gods come in? Are they gods in the same sense that we understand Lyssa to be a god and Balthazar to be a god? We don't know. I mean, these are the questions that we're all asking. And in one way, it depresses me that Guild Wars 2 has gone with so many races, because we know that there's not going to be so much lore about the gods come Guild Wars 2, because it's not about the humans anymore. And there's so many questions like this that are yet to be answered, and these gods are so integral to the main storyline of the game that I just can't see we won't get anything back from them. But I always feel like we're not going to get just enough. I suppose it depends on the storyline that they go forward with for the Elder Dragons. If the Elder Dragons are put forward to be far older and more powerful than the gods, which certainly seems like it could be a possibility. I mean, they've kind of been pushing that angle a little bit. Then maybe they'll just kind of skip the gods for the origins of the universe or whatever, those big lore questions, and attribute a lot more of that to the elder dragons and say that the gods are spawns of them or something. There's so much speculation you can make, but there are a lot of really interesting threads that ArenaNet have just littered around their universe that you can look at and come to some pretty amazing conclusions. Anyway, there we go, guys. That's Guild Wars 2 Daily. I probably wasn't very good at teaching anyone anything tangible this episode, but hey, this is the stuff that interests me, guys. It's speculating on the most mysterious parts of the universe, so I hope you liked it as well. In any case, thanks very much to Guild Wars Insider. Please feel free to leave any other lore questions you may have in the comments section down below. I won't lie to you, I've still got a lot I want to answer from the previous episode. Like, I had one here, I wanted to talk about Saul Delesio and what the Missart do with him when he goes missing, and telling you guys that story. But please feel free to leave any questions. I'll be reading all of them regardless, and eventually we should be able to get to them. So thanks very much, guys, for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.